All right, everybody, this is going to be a really important topic. This is supply and demand, and I'm debating whether I should actually use the video or if I should just focus on like actually just doing the presentation without video. So I'm curious, let me know what you think. Maybe after seeing a couple of these with and without video, let me know which you like better. So supply and demand, really important topic, and let's jump right into it. So basically, we're going to be defining markets. We're going to be thinking about how these economic theories impact the markets, defining market supply and demand, and then also going to be doing a little bit of graphs. I promise you, the more we do the graphs, the easier they will be. So here's the story. Like, here's why we're actually doing this, the motivation. For a long time, people have been debating how prices are determined and how much of everything we're producing in an economy. Let's take a look at like a medieval economy right now. Do we want to grow, olives or tomatoes, or do we want to focus on making, weapons for fighting wars, or what are we going to do? How much of everything we're going to produce, and more importantly, how are prices determined? And philosophers had actually debated what are fair, just prices. So, and how is that determined? Have you ever wondered that? Well, we're going to talk about it right now. Part of this fair prices is this idea that if you have a business, how much should you charge? And that's the first part. The second part is, let's say that all of you are a committee and we're going to, be responsible for determining prices for everything in the entire economy. Would you even know where to start? Houses, cars. I mean, I'm not just being hard on you. I would have no idea either. So these are really important questions that I'd like you to reflect on for just a moment before proceeding with this video. So maybe pause it and let's figure out, let's think about this. Now, as a business owner, what if you charge too little? What if people are valuing what you have more than you value what you have? You'd be losing money. What if you could charge more money, earn more profit without alienating anybody? That would be a hard thing. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but this is going to be considered a loss of producer surplus. If you're charging too little and you could raise prices without hurting anyone's feelings, what's happening is, as the seller, you are losing welfare, and general welfare will fall. So we call that producer surplus. Now, as a consumer, what if you were charged too much? What if you really like this item, but it's just too expensive? So that'll be a lack of consumer surplus. What if you paid for something? Here's actually a better way of putting it. What if you paid for something that the seller would be willing to sell for less? That's actually how this works. So that's a problem because you could actually get the same product for less money without hurting the seller's feelings. So I want you to consider both of these thoughts about prices that are too high and prices that are too low. And hold on to that because we're going to get to it. Now, what if there's another way that prices are determined? And we're actually going to take a look at what that might look like right now. So again, before, and this is another kind of the story, motivation about why we're doing this. During the days of kind of early mid 20th century, around World War II, there was this idea that governments would determine prices. So there was price controls. After that, certain philosophers in the mid 20th century started looking backwards into the past at the kind of original, it's called classical economic theories, saying, well, what if there's another way of determining prices outside of government edicts? So that's what we're going to move to right now, is that, do we need price controls, or is there another way? So first, we're going to take a look at buyer's behavior. And this is called, for those of you that have taken economics before, this is going to be called the law of demand. We're going to get to that. So, but first, taking a step back, buyers can do one of two things. They can either buy more or less of something based on how cheap or expensive it is. And you may, think about sometimes in your own lives, Maybe things that you used to really like, they got too expensive and you stopped buying it. Maybe things got cheaper and you're like, well, it's cheaper, so maybe I'll buy more of it. Maybe you don't have this experience, but maybe you do. Maybe you wait for sales and you buy things that are on sale. That's another example of this. Or you could buy more or less of something based on changes in lifestyle, culture, preferences, alternatives, etc. The second point is very important. Think about your own lives. When you were younger, maybe you liked things that you don't like right now. Maybe you stopped or you didn't like something, maybe you like it a lot. So an example of this are cigarettes. Collectively as a society, cigarettes were cool back in the day, and then all this research came out and said, hey, cigarettes cause cancer, and so cigarettes didn't get more or less expensive. People just realized that they cause cancer and they stopped buying it. So there are two different types of consumer behavior, and we're going to look at how to graph both behaviors right now. So, two different types of behaviors, and let's take a look at coffee, because a lot of people like coffee. If you don't like coffee, replace it with tea, soda, whatever. Now, if coffee gets too expensive, here's what happens. First of all, you may notice that in this graph, there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity. And that's because in general, the more expensive something becomes, the less people want to buy it. And the cheaper something becomes, the more likely people will buy it. So we graph this in this inverted graph with a negative slope. So you can see price is in the vertical axis, quantity is in the horizontal axis, and as price goes up, quantity goes down. Let's give a numeric example. So let's say coffee is going to get more expensive. So these are just imaginary numbers, and this could either be one coffee shop or it could be the market for coffee, and then quantity would be in millions. But let's take like one, coffee market. Let's say there's a town, I don't know, not that many people. So, and I don't know the price of coffee because I haven't really drank coffee in a while. But let's just say that a cup of coffee cost $8. Probably a little expensive, I don't know. But let's just say hypothetically coffee's $8. And in this graph, what it's showing is that at $8, 150 cups of coffee are sold per day. Great. Now, some of you in the audience or watching this video might really like coffee. And so for you, it doesn't matter how expensive coffee gets, you're going to buy your cup of coffee. Some of you watching might like coffee just for the caffeine, but you like tea just as much. And so if coffee gets even a penny more expensive, maybe not a penny, maybe 50 cents more expensive, you're going to stop buying coffee completely and switch to tea. So those are the two extremes. But let's take a look at as a collective. As a collective, you have people that are the one extreme, the other extreme, and everything in the middle. So as the price of coffee gets more expensive, some people will buy less coffee. Now, here's an example. Let's say the price goes from $8 to $14. Notice the price going up on the vertical axis, and what that translates to is a drop in quantity. So as price goes up from $8 to $14, the quantity of coffee goes from, let's say, 150 to 120. So that's what happens when buyers change their behavior based on whether coffee gets more or less expensive. Notice that if coffee started at $8 and then moved to $5, and let's actually take a look at this. Here's a good example. Let's say the price of coffee goes to $5 now. Are we going to buy more coffee? Well, yes. In fact, the quantity now is moving to the right. And by the way, remember, on this horizontal axis, quantity increases going from left to right. So if we're to the right, then that means that this quantity is going up, let's say to 170. So price gets more cheap and people buy more coffee. Now, That's the first example, when the price of coffee changes. But what if, hypothetically, and this may be hard to believe for some of you, but what if there's a new alternative to coffee? And let's say it tastes better than coffee, it has less calories because it doesn't require as much sweetener, and it, I don't know, increases focus, clarity, makes you happy. I mean, caffeine does the same thing, but hypothetically, there's an alternative to coffee and it's just so much better. How will that look graphically? Actually, we're going to depict this consumer behavior a little bit differently than what we just did. So here we have our original demand curve, which is $8 coffee and 150 units sold. Now, if there's an alternative to coffee, what is that going to look like? Well, if this alternative is better, people are going to probably drink less coffee, but the price of coffee is not going to change. So we're not really moving along the demand curve like the first example. We're not going to be moving up and down. That's not going to happen. Instead, we're going to be shifting to the left. And I'll show you that right now. So let's say that with this alternative, there are going to be some diehard coffee drinkers, but let's say that a lot of people start trickling off to this new alternative. Well, we could draw this with actually a new demand curve. So I want you to take a look at both graphs. The graph to the left, we call a change in quantity demanded because the quantity is changing as the price changes. If the price doesn't change, but we're still buying less of something, we're going to call that a change in demand because there's actually two different demand curves. So take a look at this, reflect on this, because we're going to get back to these two different ways of representing two different consumer behaviors throughout the course. Now, like we did with demand, we could also do with supply. Supply is a little bit easier because there's not as much going on, but the basic idea is, imagine you own an apple farm. If apples become more expensive, you might be willing to hire more workers, or you might have more money to buy more land, so you can actually start providing more apples. So let's take a look at what this looks like graphically. And graphically, it's going to be a direct relationship or a positively sloped line between price and quantity, that the higher the price goes, the more likely businesses are able to provide these services. Because A, if price is going up, we have more revenues, we could hire more workers, we could buy more equipment, we could buy more land. But also think about, if the price goes up, maybe wages could go up, and maybe the industry that's having higher prices can steal workers from other industries. A lot could happen. But the point is that as price increases, quantity supplied increases because of all those reasons I mentioned. And here's a numeric example. So notice that if the price goes from 10 to 15, then quantity is going to go from 100, let's say, to 200. And we have this movement along the supply curve that looks like that. Now, I didn't draw a separate graph, but there are ways that supply can increase without also changing the price of a good. So let's say new technology just makes apples, like maybe every single apple tree can produce double the apples, right? So the price of apples may not be going up, but maybe with this new technology or new fertilizer, maybe we can just produce a lot more apples. So with that, it's going to be identical to the demand curve shifting. We're actually going to have two supply curves, and let's just call the supply one, supply two. And notice that the price is not really changing. I'm really not an artist at all. I apologize, guys. But you can kind of see what's happening here. That let's say the price of apples, and let's just keep it going at $10. That's a 0, by the way, not a 6. This is still $10. I'm going to complete the circle. There we go. And let's say that this is going to go from, well, let's just keep it 100 to 200. And This is why I dropped out of art school, by the way. Yeah. But now you can see the same idea between supply and demand. So good. Now, what we can do, because I haven't yet answered the question of how prices and quantity is determined. We just looked at buyer behavior and seller behavior separately. Now let's put them together. And what we have is this graph with an upward sloping supply curve, a downward sloping demand curve, and when we put them together, there's actually one point of intersection, only one point where supply and demand meet. That's important because that's the only place in this graph where supply equals demand. Every other point is going to have either too much supply or too much demand. I'm going to elaborate on what that means actually. So let's look at three different prices. Price at 20, price at 25, price at 30. Now, the price at 25 is a very, very special price. And I'm going to circle this in red because at this price, this is called the equilibrium price, where supply equals demand. And if we look at the quantity at this particular price, we get, in this example, a quantity of, let's say, 250. Now, take a look at what happens when the price is too high. We talked about this before. What if the price is too high? And there's the problem, by the way, with government decreed price controls, because the magical thing about this equilibrium price of 25 is that it does not involve any government action. Buyers and sellers come together and determine these prices. If the price is too high, buyers won't buy. If the price is too low, sellers won't sell. And eventually, if there's enough buyers and sellers, the market will figure out what's called the market clearing price, the price where there is neither too much supply or too much demand. But let's take a look at the details about what it actually means. If the price is too high, that means the price is, let's say, at 30. Let's take a look and draw an imaginary line, I did it for you, across the x-axis. And let's circle where it hits the demand and supply curve. Well, it hits the demand curve right here, and it hits the supply curve right here. So this is going to be demand, quantity demanded, and quantity supplied. Now, if you know about the way x-axes work, the quantity to the right is bigger than the quantity to the left. So let's take a look now at this quantity supplied versus quantity demanded. Quantity supplied might be at 300, and quantity demanded may be at 200. As you can see, let's do 200. As you can see with this example, there's too much supply, not enough demand. That's a problem. There's like fish rotting in the stalls. Nobody wants to buy the fish. It's a problem. That's a problem when prices are too high. And sellers should, on their own, bring prices down so they can actually sell their fish or their pizza or whatever they're selling. Alternatively, if prices are too low, and sometimes governments will actually set prices too low because they think they're helping people, and it's well-intentioned, but if the price is too low, let's take a look. The price is going to be hitting the supply curve now right here. So there's going to be the quantity supplied at price equals 20. At price equals 20, we're hitting the demand curve right here. So now demand may be at 300. Supply may be at 200. And this creates a shortage, massive shortage. And the problem with the shortage is that people want products, but there's just not enough. If any of you have ever gone to a store and they ran out of an item, you know how much that hurts, how much that sucks? This could be an explanation. Perhaps the price is too low. So this is the story of prices and the importance of having an equilibrium price, a market clearing price. Now, this is all well and good, but how does this actually work in real life? Well, it doesn't always work this well. There are certain assumptions that need to be met in order for prices to adjust by themselves. First, the most important thing is that there needs to be a lot of buyers and sellers. Now, this rationality assumption, it's a very weak assumption. All rationality means is that, you know, there's no coercion and, you know, sellers would rather things be cheaper. I'm sorry, more expensive, so they make more profit. Buyers want things to be cheaper. The two really important ones are that there needs to be a lot of buyers and sellers, and there needs to be a free entry and exit in an industry. Anytime you have barriers to entry, this situation may not work so easily. So think about industries in the real world. How many actually fulfill these assumptions and how many don't? Think about that. Now, we already talked about market disequilibrium. That's what happens when prices are not the same as equilibrium price. And we already talked about this, but let's do another example because this is a really important topic. Market equilibrium, excess demands. Again, this means prices are too low. And if prices are too low, then there may be people that want to buy a product, but no businesses are willing to sell the product. Again, excess supply, the opposite. Prices are too high, too much supply, not enough demand. So, very important topic. The key takeaways are that there are different ways that consumers can behave. They can either buy more or less based on things being too expensive or change their preferences. And we need to think about how prices are determined, whether it should be by government decree or whether markets should determine prices. And the beautiful thing about the supply and demands model is that it does not require anybody in an office determining prices. So that would be a horrible job. I would hate any government agent to need to do that. But also, who knows what prices should be? I don't think any of you do. So the fact that we have a model where you do have buyers and sellers determining prices by their own action is very powerful. But also note the limitations of this model that does require many buyers and sellers, free entry and exit, also identical products. So maybe supply and demand doesn't work in every situation. And these are things to think about as we move forward. All right, see you guys next time.